This teenager absolutely humiliated Magnus Carlsen in front of the entire world. Magnus Carlsen, the god of chess, was in the rage to win his 4th World Rapid Championship, defeating Alireza Firouzja and leading the championship with 7.5 out of 9 score like a king. But the crown on his head began to shake when he was about to face Abdusattorov Nodirbek, the 17-year-old player from Kazakhstan who first met Carlsen in the 2019 Blitz World Championship and forced him to a draw at just the age of 15, and who was about to humiliate him once again in front of the entire world. This guy was back, and this time with more experience and more techniques up his sleeves. The final match between Magnus and Abdusattorov was about to begin, and everyone had their eyes on it. Can Magnus be stopped? The Norwegian prodigy who defeated Anatoly Karpov at just the age of 13 and became the youngest ever world chess champion at the age of 22. Will someone finally surpass him? The two titans were about to clash, and everybody knew that their war would be bloody. The pieces were on the board, white on the side of Nodirbek and black on the side of Magnus. Nodirbek started with c4, the perfect move that always leads to the English opening. The English opening is a chess opening that is usually preferred by players that like to play strategically, instead of directly attacking at black's defense forces. In fact, this opening leads to a lot of possibilities. The next move by black decides where the match leads. Magnus knew it. He was able to foresee the situation and spent 20 seconds thinking about his next move, finally replying with knight f6. Nodirbek replied with knight c3, and the game was progressing move by move. Until Magnus moved his queen to f6, offering Nodirbek for a queen exchange. Exchanging queens reduces complexity in the game. If you think you are already in a very complex position and want to simplify things, a little queen exchange is the perfect move. But queens are like the wizard of your war. In a tactical position, the queen can exert position on your opponent, making him lose his sanity. The goal of Magnus to become the god of the new world was appearing to soon become a reality. Nodirbek exchanged pieces and Magnus burst open his defenses, exposing his king. Magnus knew how to turn the game to his side, and at this position, he once again offered a queen exchange. He was ultimately relying on his endgame skills. Nodirbek still declined the queen exchange, moving his queen to f3 and protecting it with rook at f1. At this stage, the game was turning more and more intense. Magnus saw a victory and started fidgeting with a piece, trying to think of more complex strategies and their outcomes. On the other hand, Nodirbek made his moves comparatively quickly. After a few moves, Nodirbek managed to move his pawn to g6 with the support of the rook at g1. This might turn into a huge loss for Carlsen, so he decided to defend it with rook to g8. Nodirbek then moved his pawn further to g7, just one step away from gaining a huge advantage and possibly snatching the victory from Magnus's hands. Realizing the fatal blow, Magnus quickly moves his queen to h7, trying to exchange pieces. He managed to eliminate the threat of pawn and ended up in an equal position, but with a dangerous disadvantage. Nodirbek's pawn at h2 might become Carlsen's next headache. We can see the signs of little annoyance at his face while he impatiently thinks about his next moves. Magnus wants to win, no matter the cost. And with the vision of conquering the world, Magnus played a bad move. He moved his knight to c5, threatening Sattorov's pawn at d3. But it was pretty useless, because if the knight takes the pawn at d3, Sattorov can move his queen to h3 and take the knight with a check. The tension for Magnus was building up, but Nodirbek was surprisingly calm. The position is still quite equal, and anybody can win the game. 17-year-old Uzbekistan player or Norwegian prodigy Abdusattorov Nodirbek started playing chess at just the age of 6. Nodirbek took the chess community by storm, defeating top 10 chess grandmasters, and now he had his eyes on Magnus Carlsen. Magnus realized the huge disadvantage he has in this position, and disappointment was evident on his face. The goal was to not let Nodirbek upgrade his pawn. After some moves, Magnus played knight to g5, forking white's queen and king. But the world fell. Magnus played a very bad move. He moved his pawn to b4. This was a deadly move if Nördrbeck replied by moving queen to d2. Did he? Time stopped once again, but this time it started with a favor towards Nördrbeck. He grabbed the opportunity and moved his queen to d2. We are finally entering into the endgame, because after Magnus moved his king to a1, Nördrbeck replied with the final blow, moving the queen to d4. Magnus lost the game, because even if he exchanges queen on d4, White's pawn at h7 will promote producing another war wizard. He quickly resigned, giving Nördrbeck his first World Rapid Championship trophy. The crown fell from the head of the god and suited to a new place, the 17-year-old bright star. After a year, both the players once again clashed in the 2022 World Rapid Championship. The second game started with Nördrbeck having an incredible amount of confidence in his skills and Magnus trying to contemplate his strategy. The crown was snatched from him, but he wanted to establish his rule once again, and for that he needed to hit back harder. He starts with b3, which is a very outlandish move in the history of chess opening. Nördrbeck replies with e5. Nördrbeck further develops his knight to c6 in order to defend his center-controlling pawn. Magnus tries to attack Nördrbeck's pawn at e4 by knight to f3. Usually in this situation, black moves his pawn forward to e5, attacking the knight but losing the control of the center. But Nördrbeck had something really different in his mind. He moved his knight to d6, blocking his pawn at d5. This can be an inaccuracy, but in the mind of Nördrbeck, he had sorted it all out. The idea was to castle and move back his bishop and then play d5 or d6. Realizing Nördrbeck had established defense around his king, by castling, Magnus tried to expand his pieces to queen's side, but was quickly stopped by a 5-pawn by Nördrbeck. Nördrbeck was again getting on Magnus' nerves. He had to get back his crown, and in order to do that he needed to defeat Nördrbeck this time at any cost. After a few moves, both the players reached the exact same position Fischer and Anderson had in the game of 1970. Fischer had white pieces while Anderson had black pieces. In this exact position, Anderson played bishop to e6. The game is important to remember because Magnus Carlsen himself was greatly inspired by this game in his chess life, because in reply to bishop to e6, Fischer made a very flamboyant move. He moved his king to h1. The idea was to move his rook to g1 in the next move and attack with his pawn with g4 b5. This was exactly what happened in the match between Fischer and Anderson, and exactly what happened between Magnus and Nördrbeck 40 years later. Magnus followed Fischer's step to catch Nördrbeck in his trap. He launched a full-scale attack from his king's side, and realizing the weakness, Nördrbeck retaliated at his queen's side. Magnus had developed many weaknesses in the defense of his queen's side, and Nördrbeck knew how to benefit from that. But Magnus had his entire focus on completing his attack, so he moved his pawn to g6, advancing his attack. But he wasn't against any mediocre player, as Nördrbeck replied by moving his knight to d4, attacking Carlsen's bishop at e2. As the attack of Carlsen was advancing, the defense of Magnus was falling. Magnus sacrificed his bishop by moving his knight to g5, invading Nördrbeck's defense forces and eliminating his queen. The game got very intense, with Magnus regenerating a queen, quickly losing it after, attacking with his bishop to e5, ultimately forcing Nördrbeck to make a blunder, and losing the game. And this time Magnus took his revenge, forcing Nördrbeck to resign. The legacy of Magnus is still maintained, but now there is one more player threatening his place of world champion. The war between Magnus and Nördrbeck was a masterclass in high-level chess, showcasing the incredible skill and determination of both players. Despite his relative lack of experience, Abdusattorov proved himself to be a worthy opponent, humiliating Carlsen in front of the entire world.